Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Steve Smith. I'm the editorial director of events here at MediaPost. Thanks very much for coming. Every year we come here to DC around this time to tell everybody what the hell we're doing here. And it's, for those of you who are not familiar with MediaPost, we are a 20-year-old publisher focusing on the digital revolution in marketing and media. We've been covering it for the last 20 years. Mainly, we've been focusing on the consumer segment and consumer product advertising and marketing. But we started doing this event in 2012. It has grown in popularity and devotion since then. And largely we came because we started seeing something happening in the political realm when it came to our field of focus, which was digital marketing. We started seeing, especially in the 2012 cycle, innovation happening here with data-infused media buying, with greater and more sophisticated segmentation, a lot of activity, especially around programmatic. And those were the places where we played, and we wanted to see what was going on, and we wanted to see the ways in which traditional consumer marketing and political marketing really could start. In many ways, what we found over the years is that political marketers have been increasingly ahead of the curve. A lot of marketing brands, especially in their use of TV. In the 2016 instance, on this very stage, the then RNC digital lead, Garrett Lansing, told us how they were using a breathtaking system of real-time nano-targeted and message-sequenced Facebook advertising during the 2016 cycle. This was something that consumer brands really had not been doing. And we've increasingly seen a lot of these techniques migrate more into consumer marketing. And I've had a number of people from this event over the years come to some of our other events on data-infused marketing and programmatic marketing to share what they're doing and how in many ways they're ahead of the curve. For better or for worse, there is real marketing innovation going on here, whether you guys know it or not. But compared to a lot of traditional brands, some of you in this field are doing things that the brands haven't even started thinking about. And that's why we're here, to look at that kind of cross-hatching. And in fact, this is not a new topic. The crosstalk between traditional consumer marketing and politics has been going on for many years. This conversation started at least back in 1968 when Joe McGinnis wrote the book, The Selling of the President, 1968. At the time, of course, we talked about it ironically and even snarkily about the ways in which politicians were being sold as brands now and as products. But in many ways, this has inverted. Politics isn't learning from the brands. We're getting to a point where now traditional product marketing can learn something from politics. And more brands have to consider where they sit within cultural marketing, how they bring meaning and value to what they do, the ways in which they associate with a variety of cultural values in the same way that politicians do, how they respond to controversy and crisis. A lot of the same issues that occupied politics for decades are now starting to occupy brand marketing. As the political becomes cultural, the cultural is also becoming more political, and the cross-chatter between the political and traditional marketing is now more important than ever, especially as we start seeing brands take a lot of their cues from the political space. So this event is more relevant across the board than it ever has been before. We're excited about it. This is always one of our most enjoyable shows to program and to host because we're all political junkies now, but also the ways in which a lot of these themes migrate across consumer product marketing and political marketing. And we do this after action report. We've been doing this now for 6 years. This is our 6th year doing it. And the whole design here is to look at the most recent cycle, to try to highlight the key points of change in that cycle and try to understand what happened in the last cycle, what can we learn from it, what surprised us, what's important, and what's going to be carried forward into the next. I know just from talking to almost everyone who's coming onto this stage that there was a lot that happened just in the last 2 years. A lot of technical innovation, a lot more sophistication when it came to data targeting and segmentation, innovation, and also a lot of vendors that started filling the space with solutions that you all had to sift through. So we're going to be touching on that traditional argument between digital and TV especially. $5 billion was spent in the last cycle. Where the hell did all that money go? How was it allocated? How did things change? Did we get anywhere with all of that spend? We're going to talk about substantial changes that happened in the social platforms and the social channels. They went through a remarkable new level of scrutiny. At the same time, they changed themselves in the ways in which they related to campaign and media spending and how campaigns were using them. How mobile and especially texting, sort of the topic du jour this cycle was texting and the ways in which it impacted get out the vote and fundraising, but also what's its future? Is it really going to stay legit? That's still an unresolved topic. We'll be taking that up. And so much time and energy went towards digitizing at the local level. One of the themes as I was talking to everyone for this event is how much energy, time, and focus was spent driving a lot of these tools, a lot of the digital thinking that had been important on the national level in 2016, and finding ways to drive these into local and even very local campaigns. That's a theme that I think came out in a lot of my pre-event discussions, and I think we're going to hear a lot of. Voter profiling reached a new level of sophistication and precision, became incredibly more detailed, and we're going to hear a lot about the ways in which the campaigns leveraged their databases much more effectively and how data drove a lot of the thinking this cycle. And then, of course, also how data-targeted get out the vote was. We'll be looking at that effort on the ground and the ways in which both parties were were driving enthusiasm and driving people to the polls. And as I said, in talking to many people for this event, it's clear that just in the last year or two, we've seen substantial changes. There are a lot of learnings from the last cycle, and we want to better understand how those learnings are going to be applied and what we're going to be looking for in the next cycle. So welcome. A reminder to all of you, we live stream everything we do on stage at MediaPost. So if you go to or direct anybody back at the home office to the MediaPost.com home site or to the agenda site for this event, they'll get the live stream. We'll also be blogging it, and we'll archive all of those videos so you can go back and reference them later there. Also, of course, thanks to our many sponsors who helped support us in this event. Market Predict, NextMS, Political Ads, ALC, and NBC Universal Stations. You'll be hearing from some of them. Some of them are out in the hall. We want to thank them again for their support. But we're going to start with the big topic, digital spend and where allocation went. That traditional argument between TV and digital especially. There are a lot of changes that happened across these channels this time. Not only greater emphasis and greater integration of digital, but TV itself as a medium has gone through remarkable changes. We've seen a drop in general audience, but we've also seen an incredible fragmentation of that audience into a number of other digital channels. The effort to get at younger voters had to contend with their flight away from TV. New channels like OTT and addressable TV came up and started grabbing some of that budget. So we want to start with that big question. What did allocation look like in this last cycle? What did we learn? Are we any closer to integrating digital and TV and getting a greater coherence to our budgets? To take the lead on this, we have someone I think many of you know, Tim Lim. He's the CEO of Lim Consulting Services. He was a partner at Bully Pulpit, founded Precision Networks, was the director of partnerships at Change.org, and he was the co-founder of Ascend.pac. Please.
Good morning, folks. Thanks for making it out, especially with the snowstorm that happened this past weekend. I know some of you are itching to get out of the house. That was definitely the case for myself and my wife and our 2-year-old, so it was really, really exciting to be out here. So really quickly, excited to be here to talk about a very, very important subject, which is, as Steve brought up, is particularly essential because advertising makes up so much of campaign budgets today. But before we get right into it, let's just do some quick intros with our panel here. Catherine, you want to start?
Hi, I'm Catherine Algieri. I'm the Director of Integrated Marketing at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, effectively serving as the Digital Director and the Direct Mail Director for the last 2 cycles. We were the first committee to really take that integrated approach. I'm excited to be here today, and I've worked with Tim for a long time. Fun fact, I am the first woman of color to serve as the head of digital for a major Democratic Party committee.
Hey, I'm Zach Moffitt, CEO of a company called Targeted Victory. We're a performance marketing company focused very much on the digital marketing as well as public affairs. We do a lot of statewide races, a lot of support of the committees, and also was the digital director for Governor Romney's 2012 presidential campaign.
My name is Rebecca Piercy. I'm the National Independent Expenditure Director at the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. Last cycle, we tracked over 6,000 races, and the Independent Committee was active on a digital front in over 600 races with a fairly high success rate, but it was really the first time that the committee played in a digital space in any significant way.
Hi, I'm Melissa Sharp. I work at National Media as a senior media planner, so I look at all of our campaigns and plan across channel, whether it's TV, digital, radio, billboard, you name it, we've done it. Worked on some major Florida races this last year that we won, and I'm very happy to be here this morning. Thanks.
Okay, so this past cycle, we spent over $5 billion, I think, in total. And with advertising alone, I think TV spend was over $3 billion and maybe close to $1 billion in digital. So if you think about it, advertising is the largest line item on campaign budgets. By the way, these numbers are all from Kantar Media, so don't hold me to them. But when you think about allocation today, right, the digital, the storyline that was on the Democratic side was that digital spending has gone up, you know, some cases 100%, 200%. But if you look at those total numbers, it's still, you know, digital spending as a portion is still in the 20s. And compared to brand side, that's woefully smaller. You know, for our panel today, let's start off with the first question, but what do you think of the media allocations from the 2018 cycle? What are your general thoughts, observations, some trend lines? Anyone want to start? Catherine?
I think we should be spending more online, Tim.
Yes.
You know, I think that it is wonderful that we have seen, at least on our side, a dramatic increase in the amount that we are spending. But I also think that, you know, when you look at what the Coca-Colas and the Mountain Dews and the various corporations are spending, they understand that they are a brand that needs to always be on, and their audience is not always on TV. And so they create a lot of content that is completely independent and yet brand focused from what they are doing on TV. And I think one of the things that, you know, I was really glad to see this cycle was the extent to which the digital directors, and that's one of the things we do at the DSCC, we train the digital directors, we train the campaign managers on how to work on digital, you know, really sit down and make sure that they were at the table with the folks who are doing the TV buys and the TV planning. And I think that by continuing to invest in that sort of collaborative relationship, you know, we have a chance to really move the needle forward. But I think that if we leave it right now as good enough and well enough alone, like, that's not a path to success.
So I think the challenge is always going to be when we are spend isn't equal to consumption. There's a kind of misallocation from the get-go, right? So like we are less bad than we were last cycle, as we were less bad than the cycle before that. So we're getting progressively closer, I guess. For some form of conversion. And so it gets a little bit held up. So at the end, I think the campaigns, and still characterizes awareness or persuasion messaging is really just fundraising messaging masquerading as persuasion messaging. So there's a little bit of a challenge here. And so I think when you're trying to navigate that, we're trying to figure out how does that look. I think that the more sophisticated campaigns who have the resources are starting to look at that. I think they're still funding television first, but then at the very end looking for misallocations in pricing and looking for opportunities. But we're not quite there yet. I think that, you know, the question is still which came first, you know, chicken and the egg. And right now television is first, and then we're working back. And so I think that that's something that's still being worked through. And the problem is you also need the expertise of the people who've gone through the cycle to then stay and do it the next cycle, because otherwise you have this massive brain drain that we see cycle over cycle in our business because everything kind of resets to zero in the next cycle.
True. Rebecca?
Sure. So I think at our level of the ballot, you've seen a shift from TV first to a digital first perspective from the candidates, which I don't think, you know, I think it probably happened on statewide races first. And I think at our level of the ballot with these hyper-local campaigns, it's a really easy entree into digital with a lot of these folks that are running their own Facebook ads, their own Twitter campaigns, their own digital presence is being run by these candidates, which I think is a welcome shift. It's not professionalized at our level of the ballot, which is where I think the DLCC and some of our allied groups stepped in to run really professional and highly targeted campaigns in the digital space, which hasn't been done at this level of the ballot ever before. I think for me, the IE was an opportunity for us to figure out what can work on the hyper-local level. We were in 600 races. These didn't have similar messaging pieces all over the country, and certainly there were some templated programs, particularly in states like New Hampshire, where we targeted 275 races. Like, there were not 275 different digital campaigns, but it was highly targeted by region. And we're able to do that on digital and not on TV. So we saw a shift from a digital spend of basically zero in the 2016 cycle to about half of our budget at the DLCC, i.e. last cycle, was on digital spend, and we had zero TV. And it's not to say it's a TV versus digital from my end. It's more of a, how many voters can we reach with this set of money, and how many races can we impact? You know, I hired TV consultants. I think they're great. I would use them in the future. It was just a resource allocation from my front this time.
From our perspective, it's not necessarily what is better or what's TV versus digital better. It depends on what type of race you're looking at, what the client is trying to accomplish. From major statewide to national campaigns, you can't beat broadcast in terms of efficiency, in terms of overall just messaging. That being said, we are across the board seeing a lot more digital spend to complement that and to help drive that message home, because there's still a lot of people that are not heavy TV users that you're not going to reach by just adding more points. But yes, we're seeing a lot more across the board in terms of over the top, connected TV, especially this year. And then it's the question of, you know, is that TV or digital? It's being consumed in a TV long format environment, but it's bought more digitally on a one-to-one basis. So it's kind of hard to distinguish any of it anymore, and I think that's kind of the trend that we're going into.
We talked a lot about comprehensive media planning and, you know, how we shouldn't be looking at TV versus digital, but it doesn't seem like that's happening, you know, large scale today on campaigns or, you know, with organizations. You know, does anyone have like good case studies or examples of comprehensive media planning? Do you feel like it's getting better, or do you still feel like it's just kind of like a consultant fight, right, when you're media planning? Like TV consultants fighting for their piece, digital consultants fighting for their piece, mail consultants fighting for their piece, and then you end up with you know, a Thunderdome style budget. But what do folks think today's environment says?
I'll chime in on that since I do cross-platform planning. Since we aren't TV only, we do digital, radio, everything. We do think about it in a screen agnostic kind of way. I do think that there are instances where there are TV firms versus digital firms kind of duking it out for the budget. But in the case, that's where you kind of, when you think about it in terms of who are you trying to reach, what are you trying to accomplish, how are they consuming their media, and build your media plan around that instead of thinking TV first or digital first, you're going to be a lot more effective and efficient with your budget overall. We had a statewide campaign in Florida that was mostly broadcast television, but that's because we were trying to reach the entire state. There wasn't waste geographically, and voters are watching TV. We'd also had a very large digital component, but it was TV first. Same state, we also had a congressional race that we worked on for a super PAC. We determined that even though 90% of the congressional district was in the Orlando DMA, it was really only about 12% of the overall DMA. So in terms of a waste, it did not make sense whatsoever to buy any broadcast. So we shifted a lot more money to radio, to digital, to over-the-top and connected TV, where we could be a little bit more targeted in terms of geographic and demographic. Again, it is a campaign-by-campaign, you know, basis, and I can't say a blanket recommendation across the board because your needs are completely different from a different client's.
I let my consultants duke it out.
It's really fun.
It's fun. I'm running the conference call. It's fine. Honestly, like I would not. we didn't run any digital program where there was not something else happening, either from us or from our partners. So there was no standalone digital program in any single race in the country. We certainly ran mail. There was certainly field happening on the ground. Since I was on the independent side, we could also figure out what was happening on the hard side that we could actually see, so that we could figure out what those holes were and go fill in the blanks. Digital was a massive hole on our front, which is why we leaned in so heavily there. But by and large, I think that our programs were comprehensive. It might not have all been from the DLCC's IE, but there were comprehensive programs in each district without just a standalone TV or digital program.
Yeah, I think tension is good. I think that you want that. I think that you need to have that. I think also you have to be careful when you're looking at it of like kind of what the motivations are, where people are making. I mean, this is a business at the end of the day. Some people behave differently depending on which one gets more percentage of margin as in placement and other thing else. I mean, we see that from the outside looking in. That being said, I do think that Melissa's point is exactly right. Like, these races are so different, and I think for you out there who are looking to come into campaigns or committees, you have to take in consideration like how they're thinking about it structurally, so from the perspective of, I believe the IE should be far more digital focused than they are, and campaigns should be far more focused on television because they get the lowest unit rate. It's just the way they approach it. I wish we spent more time going in to understand who filled what lane and how that came together. And I think you're starting to see that more and more, mostly because people have to learn through getting burnt on a cycle that there were blind spots that they didn't know, so they hadn't had those conversations beforehand. Because once the wall goes up, obviously you can't. So you're looking at that. So I do think a comprehensive media strategy is one part of it, but the other is also understanding beforehand who's doing what, kind of who's the blocker, what roles you play. It's no different than sports, right? Like, we can't all be the running back, and I think that's the way that we treat a lot of these things, is that everyone tries to do the same thing, and we kind of over-index for that, and as a result there's this massive blind spot, and then people come in from the outside saying, well, I have all these audiences in X, like, why aren't you buying them? Like, you know nothing about what you're doing, and it's like, well, because they can't see the larger picture of what's going on. That doesn't mean that they're not right, it's just the likelihood that the pendulum has to swing to only sell for that is also miscorrect. So we have to think through all these elements as we're kind of putting the plans together.
So I do think that tension is good, but I think it really also comes down to, and you said structure, which I think is a good point, but it's like, who's at the table, right? Like, if you're somebody who came to the table because you won several years ago and you have these trusted alliances with certain players, like your media firms or your direct mail consultants, and this digital thing is something that makes you a little uncomfortable, like you just think of it as a fundraising vehicle. Have you chosen your digital consultant as somebody who's going to be a true partner to you? And when you are making the time to talk through strategy or make sure that your media consultant or your direct mail consultant is part of a key strategy meeting, have you done the same thing with digital? And I think that has been something that we've again and again tried to make sure that people do more of. But I think it's something that if you are leading a major political campaign in this climate, you have to be challenging yourself to do and really put a lot of effort into finding the right digital partner for you. There are absolutely financial incentives for the different players at the table to duke it out. And if you haven't taken the time to develop a relationship and really trust your digital person or explore that area and make sure that you understand those metrics, I think there's going to be a very natural bias to go back to what you know and what is familiar. But the climate has changed, and that isn't going to be what best serves your organization or candidate.
Zach brought up the fact that it's kind of confusing when you look at the digital spends, that a lot of it's acquisition, versus persuasion. Obviously, I think everyone in this room understands that acquisition programming versus persuasion programming is completely different, not just from message, but also from the buying tactics. But if you look at the numbers from this cycle, most of the increases in digital spending, right, especially on the Democratic side, has come from acquisition spending and the increase of acquisition spending. I get a lot of questions from reporters about this because they can't understand the difference or why there is a difference. But there is, and it's huge. Do folks think that there is what are the ramifications of that, both short-term and long-term? The fact that acquisition spending seems to be skyrocketing on these direct marketing platforms, and is that a good or bad thing? Does that impact some of the staff structure?
I mean, so I think there's a couple things. One, on the bias, and I think that's a good point, is like we also are biased to like winning the elections and working back. So television is more powerful than that. I would say that at the very end, that's probably going to be your most powerful, depending as long as you're not have like massive inefficiency and waste on your targeting. So that is one of the challenges. I don't think a lot of these organizations are structured to know what the messaging is. And you could also make the argument, especially as you go from top tier Senate races to long tail, that the races move, so it's kind of hard to get into the very end. But I don't think we do enough. I mean, I think that we underemphasize on research and digital at scale for a long time and build into it. So if the incentives aren't there, then they fall back on what are incentives that we can measure. And then that's where the performance marketing comes in, because theoretically, to anyone here who's selling a product that they can tie to performance, it should be like an unlimited budget because they just keep coming back. Now the question is whether your threshold for a lot of these organizations is they still need to make like 110% back on 100% spend, or are you at 70% back, or are you back at 50 because lifetime value and everything else that we're working through. I think the committees are working through that. So it depends on how you're looking to approach this, but to me, that's the challenge, is that as structurally as political entities, we don't normally know the exact messaging. We haven't got enough people in the room who can start that conversation in March or April of the year. We're really good in the last 2 to 3 months, and so we're still solving for how campaigns are run, and then we're trying to figure out what mediums tie into that decision-making structure.
Rebecca or Catherine, anyone want to get in on that?
I'd echo what Zach said. I think it is hard to plan committee-wide what the acquisition versus actual program spend is. I think we've expanded our digital operation at the DLCC in a massive way, like in a 400% increase type of way. I don't think that's an overcorrection. I think it was, a place where we saw a real opportunity to get up to speed with the rest of the national committees. And so I think that's a good thing. We don't do a lot of program outside of the IE. We support the caucuses, and I think you'll see us this cycle lean in with some of these state caucuses that are running program to say like, hey, have you thought about digital? It's just something that hasn't crossed people's minds. It's like, you have a field director, why wouldn't you have a digital director? So I think that is where you'll sort of see the shift from the top of the committee all the way down to some of these state-based organizations and operations.
So I oversaw all of the DSCC's digital acquisition spending the last cycle and the cycle prior. And one of the reasons that we're able to increase the amount of money that we're spending in acquisition is because the metrics are there, and it's so easy to make the case for folks, even even to folks who are newer to the digital space. And I've had the privilege of working for Mindy Myers, who is very aware of how the digital ad space works. But, if I can say like, hey, like if you're willing to let me put X dollars and Y, I can tell you the lifetime value. I can tell you exactly approximately when we're going to make this money back. It is I can tell you that it's definitely more profitable than trying to acquire a new person via direct mail, by leaps and bounds. So, although there are some people who will only ever give to direct mail, and I'm not saying that that's not an important. People love running headlines that are like, direct mail is dead. And I'm like, no, that has not happened. But, I think that going back to Tim's point, I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between an acquisition ad spend and, the persuasion ad spend. People are just like, oh, great, the DSCC spent X dollars on digital this cycle. But, now we have the Google transparency and the Facebook transparency reports for reporters to kind of, delve into. And there's a big difference between an ad that says add your name versus one that's really encouraging you to find out more about a candidate and be persuaded to follow, to support them. And I think going back to what Zach said, we haven't done as much, I think, as a party, to really research exactly what the payback points are on our digital investments for persuasion. And without that piece of it, it makes it much harder to convince folks that their money is, rather than putting those 5 extra points in TV, that they should put that same amount of money into digital. And I think that's a crucial missing piece in this as we try to move everyone forward.
You mentioned as a party, so this is what I like to call an awkward or fun question, depending on who you are. The storyline coming out of 2016, right? Republicans are the digital party now, and they've taken over as the lead on digital. Then the storyline coming out of 2018 is like, no, wait, I think it's the Democrats now, and the Democrats spent a lot on digital. What do folks think is the current situation today, past the earned media cycle, past what you're reading on the news? Is there a significant difference between the two sides? Does that matter? And what does that look like going into the future? Let's point to Melissa.
I honestly don't think it matters to compare because we're kind of running in our own lanes. And for me, I focus on the Republican side, and that to me is all that matters. Yes, we're going to try and figure out what the Dems are doing, but at the same time, I try not to focus too much on the competition. Otherwise, I think you can get blinded and get over obsessed with what the opposition is doing. And for me, I always want to keep an opposition, like a offensive type of stance rather than defensive.
I think this is also a jump ball. Depends on the state, depends on the race, depends on who's doing it. I had no visibility of what Republicans were doing in digital space last cycle. I'll be honest, none.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, people matter, and I think that the campaigns after actions always is predicated on who won. And so this is always the case, right? So if you won, you must be smarter by definition. Forget the fact that everyone else running won and they ran bad campaigns and yet they still won. So there's kind of this disconnect that occurs. I do think that, you have seen, I think that we always argue that Team Obama in 12, we didn't particularly mind their tech or everything else, their people decision-making capabilities and what they'd worked through and the trust that they had in each other, and that's what you're always looking to replicate. And so I think that's what you're doing. I think, as parties, it depends on the leadership from the top, but the problem is a lot of the leadership's input is based upon what's being written. So right now, apparently, we have this crisis of Act Blue, and we can't solve for Act Blue, but then Dems have a crisis of the data trust and what's going on there. So it always is kind of the tail wags the dog, and it drives so many of the conversations. While it is helpful because the conversations are occurring, we're probably focusing on the 5 or 10% of the problem versus the core problems, which is why did the DCCC spend $2.1 million in lead generation in the first 3 months of 2017, having just lost, and then see a 4x return. And on the Republican sides, we look at it, we should do exactly that, and then today we're not spending that. So the answers are right in front of us. It's our ability to take a step back and execute against it, and then at the end of the cycle, let's say we win, then it's we played it exactly right. Or if we lose, it's next time, we'll get them next time. And so we do have the luxury of starting over every 2 years, I guess. So there's always a way to catch up.
I'm interested in learning from good, strong advertising, regardless of which party did it. And frankly, I also want to see what we're doing in the commercial space because I think that the commercial space is leaps and bounds ahead of us on advertising, and there are lessons for us to be learning there. That said, I feel really great about the strong grassroots support that we as Democrats have, and I think, as Zach mentioned, there is now a big interest in in Act Blue, which is really just a platform to process donations.
Oh, don't tell people that.
Yeah.
No.
No. I think Mitch McConnell talking about Act Blue or other people railing against Act Blue is basically the equivalent of somebody standing outside and yelling at PayPal. But I think that the interest in the vilification of Act Blue is a step towards trying to take away a powerful tool because the grassroots Democrats are doing so well at getting those small dollar donations. But I also think that there are things that Republicans are doing that I'm really interested in, and those transparency reports. Where the Republican that detail exactly how much the Republican committees are putting into Facebook or Google are very important of going around and being yeah, I would like for us to be doing more of this too.
I think this will be our wrap-up question before we get to Q&A. I have no idea what time it is, so I'm just going to go off of... We got time. Oh, God. Okay, let me throw in one before our wrap-up question. One of the things that strikes me about the talent in both parties is kind of the lack of training when it comes to media planning and allocation on the senior level. It seems like this is something that is very heavily done on the consultant side, but a lot of campaign operatives, whether they're managers, whether they're running even IEs, don't seem to have a good training or a good basis upon a lot of these media plans that they're given to. Do folks find that to be true in their experiences? Is that something that that might help the situation? Or, is this not going to be an issue at all?
So are you talking about like just bringing it in-house and like can people figure it out?
No, I mean just even like just even having a having had a training or understanding of what a media plan looks like, right? Like, hey, when we're talking about media planning, you should be doing it by audience and not by platform, right? Those types of things.
For me, I think it was trial by fire and error, right? Where it's just like you get this media plan from your consultant and you're a 25-year-old campaign manager and you're like, what is this? And then you figure out what actually, I've had good media buyers and bad media buyers where they will explain what this actually is, but at the committees, they don't teach you how this works. They just say, here's your consultant, this is the spreadsheet, like wire the money, right? Which is terrifying. And I think I'm at the point now in my career where I actually know what they mean and I ask questions, but I think that there are a lot of operatives that just don't.
TV stations are salivating right now.
Absolutely.
When you said that.
Find me later.
I definitely think that was true when I was first coming up. I was very lucky on the Michelle Nunn campaign in 2014. Emily's List at the time had somebody in place who was there just to support digital staff and to sit down and go over, hey, like here's like your plan and like I'm somebody who's not making a commission on this at all, and we're going to go through this and we're going to talk about the metrics, what you should be asking, like what we think is working, what we're seeing work in other places, which was immensely helpful. So for the last 2 cycles, the DSCC and the DNC has teamed up to do digital boot camps that myself and Tessa Simmons from DNC have created, where we actually bring in our digital directors, and as part of their 2-day training, we actually have a whole session devoted just to understanding their plans, walking through them, and then we also will, I would work with folks for my campaigns and so did our political department, of course, to kind of go through those metrics, to be on those calls, because we were somebody who didn't have a financial incentive to say, yes, this is good, or no, I think you need to pull back from that platform.
I see it all the time where clients aren't particularly familiar with the paid media aspect. They're very familiar with boots on the ground, they're very familiar with grassroots and the political side of things. That's what we're here for, though, as your consultants, is to walk you through that. I find that a lot of times I spend the first half of any new client call going and trying to educate them on what we're trying to accomplish. The first questions I ask are like, okay, who are you trying to reach? What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish with this? Because people will come and they'll be like, I have a TV ad, let's put it on this. I mean, like, okay, let's step back. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish with this? Let's think through this. Maybe that's the right answer, but maybe it's not. And I think that the educational part is a huge part of what consultants should be doing to help committees and candidates, because that's what you're paying them for, and making sure that there is a constant partnership and open channels of communication to say, this is what exactly we're doing, this is why we chose this allocation, this is why we chose this timeline, and then really working to kind of work through their goals and adjust as you go.
I think it's tough as well because a lot of times people join committees and to learn more, and so they're tinkerers by nature, and so they're in there, and you have to kind of take a step back, and that's what time will give us over it. I think also we do a lot of spending about like what platforms, but we don't spend a lot of time on the creative, and I think there's still the execution component of it. It's hard for a lot of these groups that they're specializing still. Like if the big breakthrough is a 6-second bumper version of the 30, like we're probably still having the wrong conversation. And so we're working through a lot of those elements right now. And I think you're looking at that. The hardest part, I think, unless a committee makes a determination cycle over cycle, it's going to build these in-house capabilities and maintain the talent there to do so. That's a challenge because the hardest part actually of campaign buying is pacing and reporting. Everything else, I mean, we can't leave money on the table. This is the beauty of television. It's kind of like in a box. Like for the most part, it's going to spend out. And so people have that. Like sometimes vendors come back and think, oh, we have this money left over for you. You're like, well, that's the last thing we want to do on a campaign, right? So like that is the challenge. I think that understanding the elements that are really like the pressure points internally, and then what role a committee staffer plays within understanding that. But again, I think it's kind of like advertising. Like we've overcorrected for this one-to-one, for onboarding, for everything else. We've kind of missed like the larger picture and taken a step back. And I think the biggest element of that is we've missed like what we're actually saying and how we say it, and different iterations, and the fact of like, even I think on television, the pounding of like 1,500 points or more, at some point I think it's like kind of lost. But it's hard to have those conversations when you're in the thick of it, and it's hard to have those conversations when you're not in the thick of it, because who are you having it with? And so this is what will work, but it's flushing itself out cycle over cycle as people are getting the exposure to it.
Rebecca actually brought up when we started this question, she's like, buying in-house. Are we talking about that? This is another spicy question, I guess. This happened on the brand side. That argument's still happening. Gosh, you have good case studies, bad case studies. Seems like now that it's going into politics and committees and super PACs are discussing buying in-house. I haven't actually heard of one organization to state that they're going to bring everything in-house. It's always like they want to bring digital buying in-house, which I think is the hardest thing, and so I find that to be ironic. But we got a wide variety of talent here. What do folks think about this debate? Should the largest spenders in politics bring their buying in-house? What are the pros? What are the cons? Jump ball.
I think a committee should go first.
Actually, we've been having this conversation about digital. I don't think that bringing our digital ad buying in-house is the best allocation of our time or resources. I think that bringing our creative more and more in-house, which is something that we work collaboratively on, but we just went over our best ads for the cycle, and a lot of that creative, frankly, was creative that came into being because of input from our digital team. So I think the creative piece makes a lot of sense, but we don't have the staff or the relationships with all of the different places where we could possibly be putting ads, and I don't want to spend my day trying to figure out if my ad is all the way down at the bottom of the page on some website that folks are never going to go to. So for me, having the digital buying live with a trusted firm partner that I know is that I can count on for that is really valuable. I cannot speak to the TV part of the conversation, but timely question.
I think in terms of TV, that would be very difficult to bring in-house just because there's such a learning curve and a lot of relationships and negotiation that goes into that. And so unless you can find the right person, it doesn't make sense, to me at least, to bring that in-house. I think where it might make sense for committees to take stuff in-house or candidates is any of the social media, and not necessarily paid social media. I'm talking organic, because nobody is going to know the candidate or the cause better than somebody internally. That being said, don't just give it to an intern. Find somebody qualified that can understand your cause and whatnot. But you definitely, for something like that, need to be churning out content day after day after day. And that doesn't necessarily always make sense in terms of the big consultancy structure.
I'd bring TV buying in-house before digital. I'm also part of a 2-person operation at the DLCC IE, so there's no way I would bring digital in-house. I think Catherine's right. I would rather spend the time figuring out what content needs to go where and what comprehensive plan needs to be put in place for any of these caucuses or races, rather than figuring out the digital, where is my ad and how is this performing, and the A/B testing and all of the stuff that actually goes on behind the scenes with your consultant. So find somebody good and make sure that they're giving you the feedback and the reports so you can figure out what's actually going on and be part of the conversation to shift resources or strategy when you need to.
Yeah, and I just think, realistically, it's impossible to probably do it because the amount of cycles you would need to really be able to do it at scale, the likelihood the leadership was the same and something didn't change, and an election result didn't come in that gave you feedback in a different direction, that you would hold the line. I think outside consultancies are built for this. It's the role of agencies is to kind of fill the need and to kind of step in, because and they have to create financial structures to do so. So that's where they have to look for it. And I think that there is the expertise there. And I think you're right to bring someone in. You could build it. I think that's why presidentials can build in-house for this finite period of time, especially with the spend that's coming. But I think too often people look at the opportunity cost of the percentage of the fee to place versus do they really think they could have matched their expertise on actually placing it, and where are the other things that come into it? So it's not a flat question, but I think that for politics, it's almost impossible, given that we kind of reset every 2 years, for it to even be a long-term solution. That doesn't mean people won't talk about it or try it, but I think it'll almost always be torn down cycle over cycle, so it just won't sustain.
Okay, this will be our or do we want to go Q&A or last? Okay. All right, 2020 is over. We figure out what happened. What are we going to be talking about? What's going to be, I mean, you know, we know that the winner is going to set the stage, but what will be the big trends or developments? Heck, even platforms you want to talk about, you know, that's coming out of the 2020 cycle. Catherine.
Oh, God, I need a minute.
Okay. Melissa.
Okay, I think overall we're going to continue to see an increase in audience-based buying, not just on the digital side, but as we're getting more and more viewers and reach on connected TV over the top, and just thinking about things in a screen agnostic way, I don't think we're going to see as much TV versus digital going forward.
I bet the trend will be less TV. Just like straight up less TV across the board, more focus on the digital and sort of the cord cutter folks that are watching Hulu on their TVs. But, you know, I think with 2018, what I think the biggest lesson was digital is a thing and it's not going anywhere. So maybe it will be like, sorry, TV consultants in the room, anybody, I don't know, TV buyers, like maybe it's just not as big of a thing as it was in 2016, 2018.
I think it depends on race, right? Like I think that the driver will come from the presidentials, and the presidentials are actually solving a different problem because they need to buy less television because they're also dominating the news. And so it depends where you are on that continuum. I think, you know, the joke for me always is presidentials lie 4 years ahead. So whatever they said they did in 16 is probably what will be done in 20. So we've already got kind of the roadmap for what's actually going to happen in 2020. So that means we have to come up with like our next set of lies. So will it be like voice activated search? Will it be like how I'm using my iPod? Like it doesn't particularly matter. It'll be something because—
You still have an iPod?
Yeah, I do.
You dated yourself right there.
Whatever, but it's always these things. It's so
Cutting
funny,
edge.
like the way that people are talking about this stuff when they're like, it's going to be this. And mostly it's just doing the things that they've done better. I mean, I do think the Trump campaign showed that a presidential can be done with a different budget allocation and be successful. You could also argue that messaging, you may not have liked the messaging, but like that the messaging matters, and that matters more when you're putting it behind your advertising than other components of it. I mean, we have run a traditional versus a more fluid, dynamic campaign structure in 16, and there is a result to look at. There are a lot of other elements, but the actual media buying component of it, I think, is pretty apparent what happened there. So do more campaigns behave like that? I mean, you're seeing that with more of these Democrat primaries kind of stepping in. I mean, you're going to have 20 or 30 people. They're going to have to be more nimble by definition. So you're going to see a lot of that. I don't know, I need to see everyone on Instagram having a beer every day. But like, that's where it's going, right? Like, we're teeth cleaning. But I mean, that's where it's starting, and we'll work it back. But that will be the macro narrative that comes out of it. And so then we'll look to see, you know, how do we optimize against that?
I don't know that it'll get covered, but I think that what we will find is that the folks who run truly integrated campaigns are going to be the ones that find the most success. And that's going to be the folks who are thinking about how their communications, their digital departments, their persuasion departments are all situated to sit at the same table and to think of their campaign 360. It's not how structuring things differently this cycle so that you achieve that goal. But I think after 2020, when we look back at the folks who run the most successful campaigns, we're going to find that to be a trend.
And I'm going to be the most cynical person and say nothing will change from 2018, that it will be exactly the same allocation percentage. We'll make a bet on that. Okay, Q&A now, right?
If you have a question for the panel, please stand and let us know who you are and who you're with. We have a microphone on both sides of the room.
Hi, I'm Alex Aceval. I run digital for Telemundo Stations. And I heard a lot about the acquisition KPI. Can you talk a little bit about persuasion and the role of digital in that?
Who wants to start on that fun subject? That is controversial too. Anyway.
I love digital for persuasion. I think it has its place. I think there's a time and a place for acquisition is more in the beginning of the year, and then where digital persuasion comes in handy is towards the end when you have been running TV and radio and have that echo again, like have it echoing in a different place. Same message, probably slightly different creative because it's a different medium. That's where I think its uses. We found the use of some 6-second bump ads at the end of this other campaign extremely effective. People are paying attention. People have really short attention spans, and they might have seen your TV ad once, but they'll see it 6 more times on digital, which then they'll pay it. It's proven that they'll pay more attention to a digital ad if they've already seen it on TV. So it does lend a little legitimacy to have them running concurrently.
With mine, I used mine to bolster what was happening in the mailboxes, and so they saw a lot of this coming to their house, and we did use a lot of the 6 and 15-second ads just to reiterate what they were getting in the mail and what they likely weren't seeing on TV, because there's just not TV at most legislative level races. But for us, we used it as a way to just reiterate all of the messages that we heard the candidates talking about, making sure that they were aware of what their state legislatures actually do, and making them aware of like the implications of this race. So we really used it as like the medium for getting messages out.
Mm-hmm. Let me hone it in a little bit, because I think what the question is going to be hitting on, I think what the people in this room might want to hear is what specific, I guess, metrics when you're looking at a report, right, that you are particularly on the lookout for, because we all know now, right, that clicks, when it comes to persuasion, there's not a correlation. All the data shows there might be some sort of coincidence, but really, right, it's not a causation relationship. So what, from your standpoints, what do you think the metrics are most important when you're looking at a report from a publisher, from a platform?
First of all, they don't ask these same questions of TV for persuasion. Right. We're not asked for those same that same feedback, because there really isn't a feedback loop unless you're doing polling, until you get to election day. Kind of the same way. I mean, we can look at completion rates for persuasion on digital, which is great, a really great indicator, because it means you've got their attention, they're watching it through. But at the end of the day, it's kind of the same as television and other traditional means, that you need to be doing some sort of polling, whether it's traditional polling, whether it's a brand lift study. Those are the ways that you can tell whether or not your message is sticking.
Yeah, and I think, look, the sophisticated campaigns that are doing it now are at the end looking at, the best digital firms or television firms who are doing digital are looking at, how do I try and standardize this and give it some sort of common language, right? Like, how do I look at it and try and do that? I think what you do is create proxies. Like, is a television impression worth X times more? And just have like a level playing field, right? Like this to this, and you work it back. And I think that's what you saw a lot with the NRSCIE last cycle, is saying, okay, we're up on television, we're up on digital, where's the hole? And now where do we think? So it's not just which is the best persuasion, but like which is the most cost effective as well, because you have to take price into consideration, which I think is often lost on these conversations, is like, where should that dollar go when we're looking at these elements? And so I think that's probably the largest driver for now, because everyone wants like all this data and all this other stuff. It's all kind of like make-believe, because we really don't know what television's doing. We really don't know this other stuff. So like, we know directionally what's right, and so we can talk about it, but until someone sits down and actually does these studies that will break out television, digital, and then just control group, no one has a big enough stake with the media market, so like it's all just kind of made up. So like when you're looking at it, like I think you have to be realistic about that. However, directionally what works, and so what we do say is like the way, like you have control over the number of messages, length of flight time, right, and the audience size. And if you control for those, you can kind of shrink down and say, okay, this is what I'm going to go solve for. And so we try and put it into a structured way to answer the question to move it forward.
Can I just add one quick thing to that? So yes, I think we should think about why we ask digital this and not television. But I will say that I have heard from multiple people on the campaign trail that they really wish digital had a uniform language in the way that television does. And that would make it a lot easier for them. So putting it out there for folks if they want to get on tackling that problem.
Sorry for cutting you off, Rebecca. What do you have? Any?
Nope.
Awesome. All right. Next question.
Hi, guys. Felix at Pay Clearly. Do you see in the next cycle Facebook still being a 60% spend in digital with all that has happened?
Yes. On the Democratic side. But
so it depends. It depends when you say that number, though. I think that goes back to the persuasion versus like lead gen and the components, because I think that Facebook is still the most powerful. I did think that we saw when people take view times or force viewed into consideration, that's where Google's has a lot larger role. We're seeing the budgets move into that as it relates to the final couple months. If you're thinking about like the bigger ones, right? I think there's roles for other, but Google and Facebook are eating up a lot of the budgets. The challenge is too, and I think this is probably for a lot of people in the room, until spend equals consumption, it's not that you shouldn't be bought, it's that they're not even buying the low-hanging fruit that's available to them, right? Like they're not buying all the search, all the intent, they're not buying all the other elements. So the reason Facebook and Google, I think, are winning still is because it's a really good bang for your buck relative to how many dollars you have to spend. If you had more to spend, I think we would actually see a much more fractured buying environment. But because we don't have the dollars that go that far, and not all the expertise is there, so they get a little bit nervous, they get to the precipice, and they pull back, and they say, well, I can buy a little bit more here because I know exactly. Now again, I think bigger races, bigger media shops, a little bit different perspective, but at scale, when it all aggregates and rolls up from the math perspective, that's how I see it right now.
And I think a lot of that is just ease of the platform too, because it's just so easy to go in and buy Facebook or Google. But that being said, Facebook is great for acquisition, but when was the last time that you changed your mind on something because you saw an ad on Facebook? Yeah.
Videos for all of the day's sessions are being live streamed right now at MediaPost.com, and we'll be archiving them probably by tomorrow, so you can go back and refer to them. We're very happy to welcome someone who is, I think, a familiar face to all of you in the room. In talking to Michael Steele before this event, he was already offering some great insights as to what he was seeing this cycle. And by the way, everybody, we're going to have a coffee break in about half an hour, so if you want to grab people, you can grab them then. Great insights, especially in terms of how much of the rhetoric this cycle seemed to be coming on the national level, but a lot of the real activity and a lot of the focus and a lot of the energy was coming at the grassroots level. No one knows campaigning quite as well as Michael Steele. He presided over the last great wave, the Republican wave of 2010. He was, of course, the former chairman of the RNC. He was elected first as lieutenant governor of Maryland in 23, took over the chairmanship of the RNC from 2009 to 2011, and of course oversaw the great Republican wave of 2010. The biggest Republican pickup, 63 House seats, the biggest pickup since 1938. He is now, as you know, a frequent commentator, especially on MSNBC, but also the host of a great new Man of Steel podcast, and also probably the thing I envy him most is he has his own Muppet. Please welcome Michael Steele and Alex Weprin, who is our senior editor at MediaPost, formerly ran the news desk at Politico, to do our keynote interview. Please welcome Alex and Michael.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Weprin. This is Michael Steele. I'm really excited to be here, in part because you are a creature of politics and the media. You're as a cable news contributor, as a podcaster, as a radio host, you kind of live in both these worlds here. So the last panel was really talking about television versus digital, and I think that's a topic we're going to certainly discuss this morning. But I wanted to first kind of get your thoughts on television in general, because I know when we were talking last week, you had some strong opinions on it, and I was kind of hoping you can kind of elaborate a little bit on on how you approach television as a campaign.
Television, good. You know, we like television. It's all good. It's an interesting, it's a dynamic medium, obviously, that is undergoing a great deal of change. A lot of pressure from the digital world, the cable world, traditional television. So I guess I kind of look at it from a campaign perspective or a political perspective. There are buckets, and the biggest bucket for 60 years has been the thing that we know as the box, TV. So NBC, ABC, CBS, right? The network channels. And a lot of politics cater to the evening news programs and advertising dollars focused on that. In many respects, that's still the case. You still have a great deal of advertising dollars that go into programming in and around the various popular programs in the evening, et cetera, so that people can see your message. But what changed and what has continued to change the process and create more opportunities and some challenges is the whole other boxes, the digital box, internet, et cetera, Facebook, things like that. And of course, cable news, where I get to play day in and day out, where you do have a bit more flexibility. It's not a fixed amount of time between 7 and 11, it's around the clock. So it really has changed the way campaigns and politicians kind of look at where they're going to put their money. I know when I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2006, we were we did a number of commercials. I don't know how many of you saw my puppy ad, which was kind of noted. And we, put that in selected times in the morning. So, moms and dads are getting their kids ready for school. The puppy ad would run, and the kids were like, "Ooh, the puppy!" And so you can strategically place where you want your advertising, but you were kind of locked in in the traditional model when you could do it. With the cable model and others, you find much more flexibility, and you can go around systems and pretty much put up whatever you want.
Yeah. It's still kind of a blunt instrument, though, isn't it? Like, so if you're in a swing district in New Jersey, you have to buy in New York. If you're,
Yeah, and that's the pain in the butt is, when you're looking at it from a dollar perspective, what you've got to raise. So if I'm a candidate running for, city council or the county council, and I want to run some ads on local TV, if I'm in this market, I got to pay the DC rate. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm running in, Western Maryland or on the Eastern Shore or in, parts of Virginia. And so that again really changes the behavior for a lot of campaigns where they try to find other ways to do it, other ways to get their message and their picture out there. And of course, where is that afforded is on digital, cable, and this new medium in terms of Facebook and things like that.
Sure. So how do you manage this kind of new media ecosystem where you have cable, you've got broadcast, you've got local, you've got social media, you've got digital news platforms, you've got more options than ever if you're running a campaign. How do you figure out where to allocate your budget, where to spend your money?
Well, that's always a fight because your comms people want to spend as much as they can to get the message out there. The political director wants the money on the ground out in communities and neighborhoods. So they figured the best voice is the candidate standing at a subway stop as opposed to running a 30-second ad. So you have these internal battles, and you try to find the best way to split the political baby, if you will, or the communications baby, so that you get enough juice from one that it feeds the other. So if I'm doing, enough TV work when I go to the subway stops, when I go to the malls, I get some benefit from that because people will have seen the ad. Similarly, going out and meeting the public and shaking hands and saying hello, when I run that ad, it has a bigger impact. And this going this way, where you do the public stuff and then play on the media side, the strategy there is a little bit more interesting because I'm less committed to spending those dollars on network television because I've been out in the public, so now I'm going to go where the public plays. And where does the public play? Well, if you're of a certain age group, you play on Facebook. If you're another age group, you play on Twitter. If you're another age group, you do this or that. So I can then pick and choose. I'm less beholden when I spend time on the street and then want to go and sort of connect the public to my campaign. I've got a little bit more flexibility. Whereas the other way, if you start out on the TV side, first off, you spent a lot of money, so there's that. And then secondly, you're not sure everybody is seeing that ad. And that's the biggest problem. What is the number of looks that you get from that versus the number of looks you get when you send it in an email and they can pop it up on YouTube and boom.
So is there a return on investment factor here? Are there certain places where you can still get really good bang for your buck? Certainly television is incredibly expensive, but it's also incredibly wide-reaching. So where's the best ROI?
Yeah, well, the thing about, and that's, I think, it depends on the campaign, really. I know for some campaigns, they focus a lot less on the network side, the more traditional approaches where they go and they do the TV thing, and they do much more social media. So you look at the candidates who have come into Congress, you look at how they got there and what they did and what they are doing. When you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Facebook Living, when you look at others other candidates, Beto O'Rourke and others, who kind of, I'm sitting in a dentist chair and I've got, the camera and the phone, and you're watching me get my teeth cleaned. Okay, this is exciting because, it's exciting from the standpoint that you're reaching a lot of people in an unconventional way, in an unconventional setting. You just can't do that on TV. You're not going to bring a film crew into your dentist office and set up the camera shot and, get the right angle, you're back there like that, and then put that on TV at 7:30 at night. You're just not. So the return on investment is much better from the digital space and than you will find in the more traditional spaces, because you have control, you have flexibility, and your cost, which is the real ROI you're looking for, is, minimal in terms of what you're going to get back. I mean, the return on investment is through the roof when you look at the number of people who watch that Facebook, who then, went back and watched it on YouTube or whatever. So you realize the repetitive nature of it is there, as well as the immediate benefit.
So you kind of mentioned social media there, and that's something I think that is certainly campaigns have been dealing with Facebook and social media for years, but the politicians themselves are, they take it naturally, that use it in a way that feels organic to them. How do you kind of approach that now? We have this, you mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Certainly, President Trump is an avid Twitter user.
Oh yeah, no.
So how do you, if you're a campaign, if you're a politician, how do you kind of approach that now that you can kind of use those platforms to
some of it, I guess, has to do with your mindset. If you are of a mind, or maybe even a certain age, where that's still kind of foreign to you, you're going to be less inclined to want to do it. I've worked with candidates who are like, I really don't want to do that, and they're much happier just printing a flyer and putting it on somebody's door, and then doing one commercial with their kids in the background and putting that up on the local television and calling it a campaign. Whereas others are going to be, and I think the future is now in this respect, and I think a lot of these folks know this, where the aggressive push into this new digital space is comprehensive. It covers everything. It's not just placing an ad on a website. It is all of that and then some. And the beauty and the upside of it is the creativity. Where you find space to do something that's a little less conventional, even in an unconventional environment. And I know for me, I've always found campaigning to be something where it's all about first impressions. So if the goal is to really land with the voter, if I really want you to know me and maybe even like me, then I can find various ways to figure out. Now, what a lot of campaigns do when you couple into this media piece is knowing who the voter is. So a lot of the work before you even put that ad out there is done in identifying what you like, and tailoring my message, tailoring my connection to you to that space. So you take a lot of the consumer data that's out there on the streets now. The Republican Party back in the 1990s developed expertise in micro-targeting, in which we decided, okay, let's figure out exactly what this young lady here is all about. We know she may be a Democrat or Republican. We know she votes and how many times she's voted, where she's voted. We know where she lives. We know, she goes to church on Sunday or she doesn't. So we have some basic general information that we can gather about you. Now, with all of the things that you've done in your network, you shop over there, you like to eat this kind of pizza, you go to these types of rallies, that kind of consumer data is now folded into the political space, which is the incredibly interesting new dynamic in politics and media is all of this information is now being hunkered down in one space. And now I can target you to the point where, okay, so you are a pro-life, environmentalist who is, likes some form of gun control. And the gentleman sitting next to you is pro-choice, not so crazy about the environment, et cetera. And so you can now, I can tailor my messaging. So where the challenge and the trick comes is when I take that messaging, right, that I'm directing to you through content that you get on your phone, mailers that show up at your door, how do you then take all of that and develop a message that they're both looking at the same time and don't feel isolated from the candidate or the message? And that's the new trick in the new space, and some are more successful than others in doing that.
So I feel like data is like the most important topic when you think about
absolutely.
The future of political advertising. Certainly, how much more data do we have today that we had even 10 years ago thanks to smartphones, right? Which can track locations. So how do you manage all that data? Certainly it seems like there's so much. How do you kind of make sense of it?
Well, we have to ask the Russians about that because they seem to have a clue. That's the real challenge, is how do you manage all that data? You have these bodies that once were not responsible for this information suddenly collecting it and storing it and housing it. And the security around that, the use of that, the privacy issues that are involved in that, we've just really begun to really tap into what all that may mean, how it impacts dollars in the industry, how it impacts not just the dollars that you raise, but the dollars I want to spend, how it impacts how I access that information. One of the frustrating parts for some of the parties now is that the political organs, the RNC and the DNC, collect all this information, and they're selling it back to the parties. And the parties are like, wait a minute, you're selling us information on our own people. So you have that dynamic. So there are a lot of new doors that are being opened in this space because of how quickly it's expanding, the ease with which you can access it, the ease with which you can manipulate it. And there are some real positives, obviously, but there's some real problems as well. And I think that's still going to be worked out over time. Just as we did with back in the day in the 1990s when micro-targeting came on, everybody was like, oh my God, how dare you invade this young woman's privacy? Well, given the kind of information we were getting, it was all public record stuff, right? It was all, you can go to the Board of Elections, or you could go, to a government agency that was sort of warehousing some of this data and get it. Now, with the level of consumer information that's out there, it's not necessarily public information. That you like pizza with some weird toppings, but now I know that, and so I'm going to send you an ad that shows pizza with weird toppings, or I'm going to send you if I'm a consumer, a company that's selling pizza, or I'm going to send you a flyer that says, people who like weird pizza should be protected. So.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a risk of kind of that data being pulled back a bit as consumers become more aware of what's out there? Because certainly most people might not think about the fact that their credit card transactions can be tied to their location data, can be tied to their likes on Facebook to create a profile. So, there's been talks in Washington about privacy regulations, but that would certainly seem to impact political campaigns as well.
Oh, it's absolutely right. And in that, I think as consumers become more sensitive to exactly how exposed they are in this new space, it's going to have an impact because they're going to want some level of control to protect their degree, some degree of their privacy. I was talking with someone who this was a couple of campaigns ago, and this just tells you how far we've advanced. This was maybe now 4 years ago, and they were commenting on the fact that they had signed up to contribute to a campaign, and they had, I guess, checked the box, send me information, et cetera, which you typically do. But then in addition to that, all of a sudden they started getting not just conversations, notifications from the campaign, but they started getting certain types of ads on their desktop, and I was like, well, when you stepped into that campaign, there are a whole universe of people who were there long before you got there, who kind of collect that information. So they looked at your location, they looked at, other consumer information about you, and they started advertising to you. And they were really bothered by that. It was like, I just went onto the campaign site and I just, wanted to volunteer and write, donate some money. I didn't expect all this other level of intrusion into my private space. So that's where the consumers will, I think, draw the line in how that information about them comes back to them. So now I know you know more about me than I thought you should know, or you should, should have.
So looking back at the 2018 campaign, it seemed like a lot of the Democratic messaging was around healthcare. And when we were talking last week, you said it kind of felt like a grassroots, local type thing, driven there. So how do you, thinking ahead to 2020, how should campaigns approach kind of issues that are bubbling out at a local level versus more of a top-down approach from the party or the
Well, that's always a challenge. You hear people talking about, we're going to nationalize the race, so I'm running for dog catcher, and all of a sudden I'm talking about, what's going on at the, Natural Reserve or, the World Bank or something. I was like, I'm just running for dog catcher. The fact of the matter is, in the political space, there are these tensions that build up around issues and around candidates and states. I mean, it just depends on the dynamic. And they have a way of shaping how you talk about your race, how you talk about issues. I remember when I ran for Comptroller of Maryland back in 1998, my first statewide race. And so I go to a debate, and I'm running for Comptroller. We all know what a Comptroller is, right? And we know what a comptroller does. A comptroller is the money guy. They are responsible for collecting taxes and et cetera, right? I'm at this debate, and of course, this was, Republicans had won the House, lost the House. There was a lot of tensions with the Clinton administration, and it was all this, Democratic versus Republican stuff. So I'm at this debate, and the first question out of the box is, why are you pro-life? And so I was like, well, unless the fetus pays taxes, I don't really think this is a relevant question for me to answer. And the point was, I'm running for an office that is specific to collecting the taxes in the state, managing the fiscal health of the state with the governor, et cetera. We will never encounter a question on abortion or pro-life as Comptroller of Maryland. But what it said was that issue was roiling at the federal level. It was roiling nationally. And so it bled into what ostensibly is a, quote, local campaign, a statewide race. What I saw in 2018 was something very different, which I thought was expertly executed by Democrats. And that was, they didn't nationalize any of their races. They kept it very local. And it started long before the 2018 elections. If you go back to in 2017, you look at some of the special elections, and again, some of the local elections in Virginia, those states that are off year, Virginia, New Jersey, are off year elections, so they tend to come a year before the main congressional or presidential election years. You saw candidates winning by running on very local issues. And while some, I specifically remember the case, the race in Virginia, where the Democratic candidate was a transgendered individual. The Republican candidate was a very hard-nosed, hard-right conservative, had been the elected representative in that district for, since God wore, diapers, and had been there forever. He ran his campaign on national issues related to the LGBTQ community. So he was talking about all this family stuff and running against, this individual's sexuality and how that was a threat to the community and all this other stuff. She ran on putting stoplights at the appropriate intersections and making sure traffic patterns actually did not create congestion. Who won? The person talking about stoplights in a very conservative district. Why? Because she spoke to the issues that were more important to those people. They really didn't give a rat's ass about her sexuality. What they wanted to know is, can you get a stoplight at this corner? Because I'm tired of having accidents here. And that worked. And the Democrats did that across the board. And so healthcare became one of those issues, even though it had a national umbrella. Every candidate had a way of personalizing it and relating it more directly to their community. And what was important was the national party stayed out of the way. Tom Perez stayed out of the way and said, y'all do you, and we'll let you do you, and we're not going to interfere with that. We're not going to come down with a top-down heavy message. So if you want to run ads on that, if you want to put out flyers on a particular issue, this congressional candidate could be talking about health care, this other one could be talking about immigration, the other one over here could be talking about putting up stoplights.
So, as someone who is a regular on cable news, you've got a podcast, how do you kind of think about these different parts of the media in terms of places you go to talk about policy versus places you go to kind of really, reach your base versus places you go to kind of have kind of a soundbite that might kind of resonate?
How do you do? What do you mean?
So like a podcast sort of thing. It might be long form. You might have a long interview. You might have a long conversation.
Yeah.
Cable news, generally, the interviews tend to be short. A lot of debate. How do you kind of, think about that?
I'll tell you, the podcast space is, and you guys know, it's exploded. Everyone's doing one or looking to do one. And the reason is a couple of reasons. One is freedom. You can, talk about a range of topics and have a lot of fun with it. The other is convenience. You can do it at a time and space that works for you and your guest, and you can have a lot of fun that way. The TV setup is great. It's great, but it's also limiting. I mean, so if I'm on Hardball and if I'm on, Morning Joe, and Morning Joe's a little bit different because you've got a 3-hour span and you've got a little bit more time to play, ostensibly. But really, your life is boiled down to like 6-minute segments. So in that 6-minute segment, we're really looking at it. You realize that on these topics that's pretty something that's you really got your teeth into, you want to talk about, you can be somewhat limited in actually putting that out there and having time to do the follow-up and actually, give a substantive answer and sort of work it through. The podcast form, you can do that. I love my podcast. You get a chance to check it out. Man of Steel, it's a lot of fun. It's crazy because what I wanted to do was something that was not traditional or conventional. I want to be able to come in as I tell, and this is interesting. So I tell my guests, I said, look, the idea is I'm not going to ask you questions. I just don't want to get in this, okay, so today we've got, Joe, and Joe's going to be asked a lot of questions. He's going to answer them. That's boring. So I said, well, look, let's have a conversation. Let's pretend that we're at a table in a restaurant and we're just sitting there having some drinks and it's kind of cool and we're just talking about stuff, right? And I'll throw some topics out and you can kind of, wax poetic. You got something you want to talk about, wax poetic on that. And then we'll have fun. What is interesting is it tells you how trained people are. So you start the conversation and there's this pause because they're waiting for you to ask them a question. And I'm like, No, just talk. Let's go with it. And it just tells you how we just kind of get set into this kind of rote kind of behavior. Okay, I'm the interviewee. You're going to interview me. Ask me a question. I will answer it. So what I love about this medium is it's just the free form flow of it. You can get in there. You can push the envelope. You can have some fun with it. My podcast, we throw in a little bit of club music underneath the conversation, and what's interesting about that is that people were like, this is a great podcast, but can you kill the music? So I was like, So I told my producer, keep the music in next week. Oh, dude, it's really good, but, what's up with the music? So the music, I said, well, turn the music down as low as you can, right? So we turned it down as low as you can. Still, and what it's teaching me is how people listen. Because if they were in an environment at a club or a restaurant and there was background music, it wouldn't bother them. But when you put them in a setting more traditional, like a podcast or what they think is a conventional set with how they, it's just all I want to hear is the voice. The brain doesn't kind of compute it for them, so they get all discombobulated because there's music. I leave the music in because the music is cool, and I think it adds to the conversation. And slowly but surely, the audience is coming along to saying where the music doesn't bother them. They actually think it's kind of cool, and that's the process. And that's, in politics, that's all about how you train your voter. In television, how you train your viewer to come around to a perspective that may be somewhat outside of what they're used to doing, or is not conventional, and eventually they come back into that space a little bit more comfortably. So I love that with that medium. It's great.
Great. So I think we're going to take maybe one or two questions.
Sure.
You have questions of Michael? Actually, I wanted to follow up on your podcast point,
Sure.
Michael, because one of the slams against podcasting is that it tends to sit within the bubble. We tend to self-select podcasts that are reinforcing our held views. Do you find that you're reaching a new audience and you're reaching beyond maybe what would be considered a natural audience for a former RNC chair?
Yeah, that's a good point, and it is somewhat. We do gravitate to spaces that we're most comfortable with. So if you and I agree on a lot of stuff, then we're just going to be in that space. We're going to love it. And he comes in and messes the whole thing up. We're like, no, stay away. What I try to do, and a lot of it's driven by who you have on the show, and so I try to get Democrats to come on and talk, as well as Republicans. So it's not this; it's much more of a balance in terms of who's there. So we'll get. We had Congressman Swalwell on recently, and we're trying to get some really progressive liberal types so I can really pull my hair out, and I've done a good job of that already. But the goal is to really try to mix up the conversation, because you're right, people kind of fall into a space where if they perceive you to be a certain way, they perceive everything you do to be that way. But when you come out and you say, I love one of my favorite things, people come up to me and they go say, I like you so much better now than when you were RNC chairman. Well, I don't have the title, and it's amazing how titles play a role in what people think about you. I can go back and show you things that I said when I was RNC chairman that really pissed off a lot of Republicans. I'm still saying today, but they sound differently because I don't have the title. And so that's one of the ways I think you can sort of break up that sort of mindset about your podcast, is to mix up the kind of people you have coming on, be a little bit less conventional in it, and even stretch your own limitations and press yourself to be a little bit outside the box. Because at some point when you get where everybody's so comfortable, where they're just sitting there nodding to you when they're listening to you, then you're not really being effective anymore.
All right. Any questions?
Joe Mandisi from Media Post.
Hey, Joe.
Voters have always been somewhat skeptical, but do you think because of all the shenanigans that have happened over the last couple of years that they've become cynical? And are they tuning out? Does advertising messaging even mean anything anymore?
That's a good question. I think voters they've gone from skeptical to cynical to concerned. And I think I don't know if advertising will play a role in alleviating that concern or exacerbating it. In other words, you know, it'll be interesting to see how Donald Trump does advertising in 2020, given that he did so little of it in 2016. I mean, it's amazing. That campaign is a case study on so many levels in terms of how he used media to get the kind of free advertising that he was able to get. Now, a lot of that was the media's fascination with this gadfly out of New York, so he was good for ratings. That I think created a lot of cynicism and skepticism for a lot of viewers out there. Now it's more concern. They're concerned. I hear it. They're concerned about what this space is going to be like in the next year. And I think you're going to see voters much more engaged and much more opinionated about it. It'll be interesting to see the kind of campaign ads that the Democrats run. Certainly Trump has given them a lot to work with, but how you use that, particularly with a voting population that is, you have a certain number, 38% or whatever, is so hardcore still on Trump. How in certain regions of the country the Democrats need to do well, how they, you know, message that and use that medium to sort of create, like I said at the beginning, a space where, you know, two very different voters walk away from seeing that commercial with the same good impression about that candidate or that message. But I think they'll be busy trying to figure that out, because the voters right now are not showing much interest in that particular side of the medium terms of commercial, because they're really locked in other things right now.
Well, should they be taking a lesson from your earlier point about how much local issues were driving a lot of these campaigns? Is that a sign that the partisanship is more of a focus in D.C. than really out there in the rest of the country, and that people want a more local and relevant politics?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it does to some extent speak to how the media and campaigns can be their own worst enemies in terms of how they put together and message to voters. The partisanship question is an underlying question, I think, for a lot of people out there who are fed up. They're just sick and tired of the whole thing. So it was very refreshing for them to see candidates come in and talk about these issues in a very sort of normal way. And so when you have someone who tries to take, like the Virginia race, tries to take something and to be so partisan about it, you know, talking about some personal business of an individual or whatever, voters have now shown a tendency to walk away from that. And I think that's sort of also a reaction to Trump and how he's personalized politics in such a way that a lot of voters now seem to be turned off by that. Now, presidential campaigns, once they get started, as we all know, become, you know, self-fulfilling nightmares. And the reality of it is, once voters get back in the game and in the mix, and the campaigns get ramped up, and the stuff starts coming fast and furious, how they respond will mean a lot. But here's the element that no one can really factor into, and that's Robert Mueller, and what Robert Mueller does on campaign messaging in 2020, and whether or not his decisions and actions actually has the opposite effect of, maybe even the direct effect of nationalizing races that candidates actually would like to keep a little bit more local, because everybody's going to know, particularly if you're running for a statewide office like governor, or you're running certainly for federal office. So what do you think of the Mueller thing, and how does this play out, et cetera, et cetera? So that'll be interesting. It's almost like, again, my comptroller's race where, this national issue just kind of drops into the middle of your campaign. It's like, dude, I'm running for dog catcher. Why am I talking about Robert Mueller? But
well, thank you for ending us on a note on opening a huge can of worms.
Yeah.
Michael Steele, thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Thank you guys very much.
Number two is that we need less risk in our decision making. And then I'd say the third one is that we need answers quickly. We don't have time to waste. I'm with Market Predict. As they mentioned, we're powered by the EW Scripps Company, which is a 140-year-old media company. We really oversee national and local brands, most importantly our television stations. And political is our oxygen, whether you look at it from the content side or if you look at it from the revenue side. We've been doing politics for over 140 years. And so data is really important to us, and where we are now being comfortable with data and where our success and confidence really comes from is from the data side. Because just like you, we're looking at focus groups of news consumers, we're looking at focus groups of lifestyle consumers, we're looking at focus groups of political and voters, and we're really, those focus groups and those end users or consumers are really driving decisions as a company that we are making today. And where our confidence has continued to grow is really in forecasting political elections and outcomes over the last 3 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So the themes we've already heard kind of from the first two sessions is that what we're seeing or what we saw as the trends in the midterm cycle doesn't really set us up for our successes, let's say, in 2020. We learned a lot, some good things came out of the midterms, but the one thing that we know is that there's no certain win out there and that we really need to get smarter with our data to help us. So are you looking for an efficient way to keep a constant pulse on the electorate? And I'd say a lot of you I know, and you could be with media, some of you are pollsters, some of you are academics, but no matter kind of where you come from in the organization, we all are looking for answers right here and right now, and how we are staying connected to that voter, and especially with all of the unexpected events, can we say Kavanaugh, but so many expected events, whether it's national security, but in so many different issues that affect an election, that we have to make sure that we are looking at data in real time. So what is Market Predict? It's a proven campaign strategy simulator, and it's rapid fire forecasting. And that rapid fire forecasting really looks at not only how will voters be influenced by your strategies on the campaign, but also by events. So we look at earned media, we look at social media, we look at voter turnout, we look at the issues that are really important to voters. That's really a theme that we're following and tracking daily. And then we also look at paid media and what is the messaging that's out there. And we bring it all into a very holistic environment. So what you look at is kind of all the principles. So many of you have been doing politics for so many years. And if you look at all these different ways in which you've made intelligent decisions for your campaigns actually running scenarios in real time. So we challenge to say that simulation is where politics needs to be headed into 2020. So a few case in point examples, because not only are we a simulation tool, not only are we a media optimization tool, but we're also a campaign awareness tool. And so this just gives you an example, in this case, of Lee, who was running for Tennessee GOP, was the going in, and there wasn't a lot of paid media that people were tracking behind Lee, and there were also not as many public polls behind Lee. But when we started tracking this, having stations in Nashville, and started following Tennessee politics, what we realized back in May is that Market Predict really showed Lee's climb long before polls did, and that way we could say, okay, you know what, let's continue to track the earned in social media, and we can see now that Lee is going to win this race. The second example is just kind of in that campaign awareness again, is Florida. In Florida, when we look at Gillum and DeSantis, and 2/3 of the attention was on Gillum in the beginning in that race, and Gillum being the underdog going in. But what we saw, and when there were also kind of gaps in the public polls, we saw that when Trump made a speech on behalf of DeSantis, that 2/3 of that attention was really shifting towards DeSantis, and what we were able to show is that DeSantis had the lead and was going to squeak out this race by a few hundred votes. But more importantly, like over the course of Market Predict since 2016, we've been working with hundreds of clients, 48 elections, and when I talked about our confidence in elections, directly to at the 48 elections. We started back in 2016 with the Senate and presidential race. We then turned to the Virginia gubernatorial race in 2017. And then in 2018, we looked at gubernatorial, Senate, and a few AG races across some of the most highly contested states. And what we know is because we are looking at these races in a very holistic environment, that we are 40% more accurate than polls. And we have made over 147 million media recommendations over the last 3 years. So who do we work with and how do we work? Well, like we said, we truly believe in polls. They're a great snapshot. We also really believe in micro-targeting. Micro-targeting, just as Michael talked about, is really important for those one-to-one conversations with your hand raisers. But where we also think you need is Market Predict, because you're bringing all of that data together to give you actionable insights that you can use, whether you're a campaign strategist, a consultant, or a media buyer on a campaign or in an agency. So who do we work with? What types of questions can we answer for you? If you're on the campaign side, should you hold a rally in Cleveland or Cincinnati? We know Ohio is always a hotbed. If you're a media buyer, what broadcast programs are going to reach the most convertible voters? Should you be spending more money, as we heard in the first panel? Is it digital? Is it television? How should I change? How should I cultivate my media marketing mix to best go after my voter base today? Because we know 2020 will bring new challenges. What are the most important issues to convertible voters? Like I said, Market Predict is tracking all of the issues through our focus groups. What will be most important in California? Is it the fires? Is it the flooding? What's most important now? National security. But all of those issues we're tracking in real time to help you know what's driving your campaign, which may be very different in Florida versus Tennessee.
And then the last thing is, how much budget should I allocate to a specific geography? If you're working on a statewide campaign and you need help navigating your advertising spend between markets, we can help you do that. But if you're working on a presidential and you need help shifting dollars between 2 states and want us to run scenarios about what that would look like, we can help you. And then the last one, a question that we get often, and I think we'll get it more so in 2020, hearing to what everyone's saying this morning, is a lot about creative messaging. And creative messaging, we know, has to really speak to your audience. And we're able to A/B test creative for you without putting any money behind it. So if you're a small campaign, that's really, really important. You don't have to go live on television with a creative you're not 100% sure about. So what questions can we answer for you? And that's why we're here today. We are already set up. We're building a UI right now, a user interface to help with 2020 scenarios. And in the room and here at the conference, we have people much smarter than me. That's Joe Schultz and Joe Zappa, who are 2 of our political analysts. So although we are making smart decisions and machine-based modeling, we do have real live people that can answer your questions and help you set up for 2020. We also have at the booth today Jamie Drennan, who is our product manager for Market Predict. So thanks so much for your time. We hope we can have a conversation with you.